All right. Now we're going to need to figure out exactly where we were. Did you get to see this? Listen, because we got into World War I.
Yep.
And I thought were we still on the map when we quit? Okay. This is the very next thing after the map. Please realize you can go on to my website and watch this slide presentation and actually see and hear all the videos that are in the slide presentation. Works pretty nicely. World War I, having started because Germany attacked France, that wasn't the real reason for the war, but that was the reason that Germany became known as the bad guys of the world. Because they attacked France to allow them to beat Russia, which was going to jump in when Austria-Hungary went after Serbia, right? So it was a logical order. It's very easy to understand why it happened, but at the same time, if you were France or the rest of the world, you go, what was that about? Okay, that's like Jason and Austin getting into a fight, and because they're in a fight and Jason knows that Cody is Austin's friend, he goes to Whitmer, who's his friend, and says, punch Cody. And you go, how does that equate to their fight? You know what I mean? It doesn't really make any sense. Right. Smelling person, anyway. That's nice. So let me show you really quickly some of the things that came about that made World War I so absolutely terrible. Okay, watch this video carefully. I may not show all of it to you, but what this is going to show you, this is just somebody's compilation of a bunch of old videos that came from World War I. Okay, and it's kind of about the technology. Okay, there's no sound. If you watch it off my website, you'll have sound. Okay, they invented the Gatling gun, the machine gun. There were battles in this war that lasted for months and months and months. Okay, the Battle of the Somme cost 1 million lives all by itself. Okay, the Battle of Jutland. You have to know that one of the military technological pieces, they had more advanced ships. They built ships called dreadnoughts. They were the battleship that was so big. They had guns, I kid you not, some of the guns on these battleships were this big around. They shot a shell that weighed more than an old VW Bug, and they could shoot them for 25 miles accurately. Okay, so they would get into these battles. You can see all of these battleships, and they had other ships that supported the battleships that had pretty good-sized guns on them themselves. They would actually shoot at each other. They couldn't even hardly see each other. They were so far apart out in the middle of the ocean, and they would shoot at each other and sink each other. Okay, 20, 25 miles apart, they'd start shooting these ginormous shells. They weighed 2 tons. They weighed 4,000 pounds, one shell. They could also stand off the coast of a country and launch their shells into the country's 20 miles, okay, and blow stuff up that was anywhere nearby. Okay, it was a whole new age of even sea-going war. Yeah, Kara? Oh, gee, here we go again. We're not even going to that subject. They destroyed entire tracts of land, burned it to the ground, trampled it to the ground, and they mostly fought in farm fields. Okay, the military technology, that is the military fighting style, did not jive with the new technology. They would still march their soldiers in lines up to the other guy's troops, like they did in the Revolutionary and the Civil War here in America. Okay, but they had these amazing weapons that could destroy huge amounts of these men all in one foul swoop. Okay, look at this. This one's a It's a rail gun. They're still trying to master that technology. Okay, this one is, it's still in the prototype phase. Okay, it doesn't actually shoot out of a barrel. It's more like a rocket, but not really. What's this one here? Oh, they had color photography for the first time ever. So they took pictures in color. Most of the pictures are still black and white, but there are obviously are color pictures. You can see the trenches. These are mostly posed. There you go. There's a gun for you. Hooked onto a train and fired off the rails. Okay, those are American troops marching in at one point in the war. It was a, they're actually stories about these tanks because we still had cavalry in our armies. We still had horse-mounted soldiers. And at the same time, they had tanks like that. So how do you fight a war that has both tanks and horses in it? Okay? They said there were actually cases of soldiers riding horses with drawn swords hacking on a tank because they didn't know what else to do. Okay, tanks and planes that bombed horses. It was the most goofed up war you've ever seen. They used blimps to fight from. They used them as observation posts so they could see the other guys, but they also launched planes from them. Okay, first time they ever dropped people out of parachutes, because remember, planes were only 11 years old when this war started. There were a lot of advances. Oh, here's a cool one. Quick, where's my little guy? Stop. Oh, good, I got it. We were so confused in this war, we didn't even know whether our soldiers were supposed to wear armor or not. There were still throwbacks to the Middle Ages, you know, where knights wore that big, heavy armor, okay, and this modern technology. Those guys are wearing metal armor, okay, trying to protect them from some of these weapons. We were so messed up, we just didn't even know what our military was supposed to be doing or looking like. The United States wasn't even in the war at the beginning. The British and the French and the Germans really struggled with this. And it's one of the reasons so many people died, okay, because we were just really confused. We lived in the or we fought in the trenches, right? We had thousands of soldiers in these deep trenches. They dug into the farm fields. If you stuck your head up above the trench, you got it blown off. So you had to stay down below. So how do you shoot when you can't stick your head up? So they invented these little periscope things you could stick up and look here and see out above the trench. They lined the centers, the no man's land in between the two trenches, with all kinds of obstacles and barbed razor wire and all kinds of stuff in there, because the only way to advance was to rush out of your trench, run across no man's land, and jump into the other guy's trench and fight him hand to hand. Okay? So the way they figured they could do that was they had to bomb the snot out of their trench, right? Well, we didn't have airplanes that could do that. The airplanes were so slow because they were made out of fabric and wood. They were so slow they could get shot down from the ground easy. So they built those big artillery weapons, those huge guns that would be 20 miles behind you, shooting over your head, trying to land on the other guy. Okay? And they would pound and pound and pound. Now, you can imagine what would happen to you mentally if you sit in a trench literally for months. Remember that one battle they said lasted 11 months? You sit in these trenches for month on end. You get sick. There are rats and other stuff, lice and everything else living in the trench with you. Any men that died would die in the trench. You can't get out to go bury them. So they stayed in the trenches. And then all night and all day, you have the constant bombardment from the artillery on the other side. These shells were huge, and they made huge explosions. And sometimes they score a direct hit right on the trench. Okay, so you had this fear. As soon as you heard that telltale whistle of something falling, you started wetting your pants. Okay, because you didn't know if it was coming for you or for the guys down there just a little ways, or the guys down there just a little ways, or it was going to go past you, or it was going to land in front of you. You had no way to know. Okay, with literally men who never got shot came out of the trenches totally destroyed. Their minds were gone because of this intense stress 24 hours a day of having to kill or be killed in those trenches. Okay? It was absolutely awful. Okay? Terrible, terrible things we did. Oh, and then they upped it one. Let me move on to another picture here. So we're talking about the war in the trenches here. Okay? They had to dig the trenches first. Okay? And then once they dug them, they had to figure out how to reinforce them, because in France, in northern France, it rains a lot. So guess where all the water went? So you lived in the mud with the giant rats, not enough food, dead people, going to the bathroom in the trenches. You know, you had to sleep in the trenches. They carved holes to try to make beds, you know, in there. It was just, I can't even imagine too much worse in this world than trying to live in those trenches. Okay? Confined, tight spaces. So if you were claustrophobic, there were days you would jump out of the trench and get yourself killed to get out of the trench. Seriously, it happened a lot. Okay? So anyway, we go through all of this stuff building these trenches. Well, when they realized that things were going really slowly, we just weren't winning, okay, by doing this, we had to invent some new weapons that would speed the trench warfare up. So some Brido, and I don't know which side it was on, whether it was our side or their side, okay, but some Brido came up with this idea. I got it. I figured it out. Here's how you do it. We'll flush them out of the trenches by shooting chemicals at them. So they shot chlorine gas in those big shells, and when the shells exploded, the chlorine gas, which was a yellow, dense, yucky-looking gas, okay, it would drop on the ground. Okay, I think. Anyway, the gas would hit the ground, and it was heavier than air, so where would it go as it moved along the ground? Down into the trenches. If you didn't get your gas mask on in time, you were scalded, literally burned all the way down your esophagus and into your lungs. If the shell hit close enough, it would melt the skin right off your body. Okay, chlorine gas is absolutely awful. Okay, I've smelled it working for a swimming pool company, just in the densities that we had to work with on, and it about makes you want to puke and hurl because it's so bad. And here it was really bad. And then they invented other gases like mustard gas and things like that were even worse than chlorine gas. They were absolutely terrible. Okay, we did things in World War I to the other side, and they did them to us, that would get us tried in the World Court for crimes against humanity now. Okay, they were just terrible. We had so many soldiers on both sides of the war that came back to to their home country. They never got shot with a bullet, but even if their minds were still there, their bodies were destroyed. They couldn't breathe anymore. I mean, literally, they could just barely get enough oxygen to survive. They never could do any work. They couldn't play. They couldn't do anything because they were destroyed. Parts of their bodies had been melted off. It was just absolutely terrible. Okay? You can see it would have been fun to live around there, wouldn't it? Okay? Oh, here you go. Shell shock. These are guys that were damaged, not all of them physically. Okay? You'd see men walking around. There you go. That's one of the joys of World War I. Now, these kinds of things happen in all war, right? Okay? Whole bottom jaw gone. And then you had the crippled minds. This guy had shell shock. He was one of those ones. These are the guys that were so scared out of their wits by the experiences in the trenches, they could not control their own bodies. Their minds were just gone. Okay? That guy is doing everything he can to walk to that chair. It has nothing to do with the physical injury. It's all in his head. Because he was so wiped out mentally in that war. It still happens, but not like it did in the trench warfare. Okay? All right. Now I'm going to stop that. If you want to see the rest of that, you can go on my website and watch the entire presentation. Now, here's how bad it ended up in the final numbers. Okay, remember we talked about that we've lost quite a few thousand men in 10 years in Afghanistan, that kind of stuff. Our side, okay, this is the good guys, if you want to call it that, okay, because they were on our side. During World War I lasted from 1914 to 1918. So if you haven't written down 1918 as the end on your notes, make sure you do that. 1914 was the beginning, 1918 was the end. So 4 years, that's all it was. Long enough for you to get from 2nd grade to 6th grade. That's all it was. Our side lost 5 4,700,000 soldiers. The bad guys, the German side, lost 4 million soldiers. Look at that, almost 10 million military deaths in 4 years.
Wait, when did it end?
18.
When did it end?
1918. So in 4 years, we lost that many. Okay, now, we're going to look up here. Where are they? The Russian Empire, okay, Russia lost over 2 million men all by itself. And they left the war a year early. They quit in 1917, and they'd still lost almost 2 million men. They were being wholesale slaughtered. The Germans were just slaughtering the Russians on their side while they were still fighting the trenches in France. So it's a fairly good bet that the German strategy was correct. Had they been able to destroy France quickly and had then moved over to Russia, they could have beat Russia. Because they almost did, as it were. The only reason they didn't win is because we jumped in. Yeah.
What was the war? What was it about?
If you missed all that yesterday, I'm not going back over it again. You better go watch the video that I've made of this lecture. Okay? So then we add in civilian deaths. That's people that were not military people, the people like us, just normal citizens. 3.5+ million for the good guys, mostly in France and Belgium and the places right around there. The bad guys lost just shy of that, 3 million+, probably mostly in Germany and Austria-Hungary. Okay? So we're looking at a total of, what is that? 16, almost 17 million people died in those 4 years in war. And that doesn't count all the terrible injuries. Look at the military wounded. 21 million men wounded. That's on top of the almost 10 million that died. Okay, so we're looking at 30+ million soldiers that were affected one way or another by this war, okay, as far as wounds and death. Okay, do you get the gravity of that? When we get upset about a few thousand in modern warfare, back then we were talking about millions. That's why they called it the war to end all wars, because nobody could imagine anybody would ever do that again, because it was so bad. And it was all, and most of it was because we had this big mix-up between technology and style. Okay, we just couldn't get our technologies, tanks and rapid-fire machine guns and those kinds of things lined up with the methods that we use to fight war. We still just tried to rush them. We got more than they do. Let's run. Only problem is they had a better gun and they could shoot more bullets than your side could, and so they just mow you down. Well, America didn't win, but our side, our group of allied countries did. You can see there were a lot more of them. Okay? It took all of those countries above that middle blue line just to beat those 4 countries in the middle. Yeah. It was not, we seriously should have lost that war, because Germany was just incredibly powerful, and they were motivated. You know, everybody was attacking them, in their home area. But it was very close. Okay, but then we go even one step further, and we say that the end of the war in 1918 did nothing but cause new problems. See, back in the old days, when the kings were in charge of governments, when they conquered a country, when Britain fought France, or France fought Germany, or Germany fought Russia, or whatever it was, the winner of that war understood a very basic principle. You can replace the government. You can put a new king in. You can do lots of different things with the government. But the one thing you cannot do is you cannot destroy the people. Because if you destroy the people, or if you just tick the people off, by, for instance, say the French beat the British in a war, and they did periodically. Say the French win. If the King of France goes in and says, I am now the King of England, and you're going to speak French, what do you think the British citizens would do? They'd continue to revolt, right? They would start underground movements, and eventually they'd try to kick the French out. They understood those principles. You cannot do that. You have to treat the people as though they're your own people. it's the government that started the war. You've got to attack the government, right? So you take out those people, put people friendly to you in there, and everything is happy again until everybody forgets, and then we start over again, all right? Well, in this war, the governments of Britain and France had forgotten. They forgot what happens when you beat a country at war, that you have to help that country rebuild and get them on your side. Instead, they chose to punish Germany because it was Germany's fault. They attacked France. Okay? They ignored what happened to Austria-Hungary. They ignored the whole Serbian thing. They just completely ignored all of that stuff. And they told Germany some of these things. They said at the Treaty of Versailles, which is the place that they signed all the paperwork after the war was over with, they said, Germany, you blankety, blankety, blank, you know what? They said, you cannot ever do this again. And to make sure that you can never do this again, we are going to make you pay for what you did. Rule number 1, you cannot have an army bigger than this, and they gave them a number. You cannot have a navy bigger than this, and they gave them a number. They said, you can't have any more submarines than this, and submarines were brand new. They said, you can't have any submarines more than this, you can't have more ships than this, and you cannot even put your army here, 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 and here inside your own country. Would we let anybody tell us where we could put our army inside of our own country, even if we lost the war? Heck no. The problem for the Germans was they had been bombed into oblivion at the end of the war. They had nothing left. If they didn't sign the treaty, at least the French and the British would have pounced on them and beat them to a bloody pulp and maybe erased Germany completely. So they couldn't let that happen. So they signed the treaty. And they said, okay, we hate it. They actually walked out of the treaty signing ceremony once, but when they called their military leaders back in Germany and they said, can we still put up a fight because this is wrong? The German military said, we don't have anything left. And they went, oh, shoot. So they had to go back and sign the treaty. It was that bad, okay? They gave them all the rules about their weapons, where they can put them, where they couldn't, how many they could have, and then they added insult to injury and said, now you owe us money. You're going to give us money to pay us for all the damage you did to our country. Now, you think about that, that kind of sounds fair. I mean, they started it. They should have to pay for it, but when your country's been bombed into oblivion, are you going to be able to make money to pay another country? Their factories were blown to smithereens. Everything was a shambles. Most of their men were dead. There was almost an entire generation of young men that was just gone. Every young man from the age of 17 up into 30 had been in the war. Almost an entire generation was gone. They were all dead or wounded. Okay? So who's going to make all the money that you're going to pay Britain and France with? They can't. Everybody knew it, but France and Britain were so mad that they wouldn't settle for anything less. It was so bad that President Wilford Woodruff, the President of the United States at the time, he walked out of the treaty signing ceremony and said the United States will not participate. We will not do this because this is wrong what you're doing to Germany. They didn't just do that. They cut up Germany and gave parts of their country to other countries. Okay, the area in between, my grandparents lived in the very northeast side up by Russia. Okay, they lived up there, and they used to be able to just travel, a few hundred miles and get to the main part of Germany if they needed to. Well, after they got done with the treaty, they had to cross Poland to get to Germany because they cut a chunk out of Germany, gave it to Poland, and said, this is now Poland. The area my grandfather was born, he was born a German citizen in 1916. By the time the war was over in 1918, he was officially Lithuanian. The Lithuanians was a little teeny country above Germany there. Lithuania is more like Russia. Germans hated Russians. Last thing they want to be is part of that kind of culture. My grandfather was actually running from the Lithuanian police as a teenager, a late teenager, when he met my grandmother. Okay, he had been part of that youth group trying to get rid of those things that had happened during the treaty. Okay, get that thing given back to Germany by making Lithuania not wanted anymore because it was so bad. He was actually being chased by the police, and escaped into Germany across the river, and he was hiding at my grandmother's farm when they met. Okay? So that's how angry some of the Germans were because of the lands that were taken away, the punishments and everything else. It just was wrong. Okay? They blew chunks on this one, and they paid for it dearly. Because even though that war should have never been repeated, the Germans did what anybody would do, including the United States, and they went looking for help. We've got to find a way to rebuild our country. We've got to find a way to bring back the glory of Germany. Okay, back in 1980, way before you guys were born, I was a teenager in high school, and we had a big presidential election. We'd had a president for 4 years named Jimmy Carter. It is very possible that Jimmy Carter was the best man that has ever been the president of the United States. In his heart, just the kind of person that he was, he might genuinely have been the very best president we've ever had. But because he was such a good guy, and he could see right and wrong, he couldn't get himself to do things for the United States, to protect the United States, and because of that, we ended up getting a couple of hundred of our embassy employees in Iran kidnapped. They were held hostage in Iran by people who overthrew their government and hated the United States. They were held hostage in the embassy in Iran for 700 days, over almost 2 years, something like that. And he couldn't do anything to get them out. Nothing he did, because he wouldn't go drop a nuclear bomb on them or do anything like that. They tried one time to go rescue them, and our choppers crashed and burned. I mean, it was just a miserable thing. The United States felt like they were totally humiliated in public. Okay, and the rest of the world, we looked like a bunch of diaper-wearing babies. We couldn't get our own people back. Okay? This little snot-nosed Iran was doing this to us. Okay? So up stands a man who had the gift to speak because he was an actor. And he'd been in war movies and all kinds of stuff. He'd been the governor of California, and he started speaking, and he was an incredible speaker. Anybody, even people that hated him, loved to listen to him speak because he was just that good. His name was Ronald Reagan. He got elected as the president of the United States, beat Jimmy Carter in the election, and ended up for 8 years, he went around, and when anybody looked at the United States funny, he knocked their head off. Yeah. I mean, we invaded a couple of small countries that were, I mean, they were doing some bad things, but he had no qualms at all about saying, oh yeah, sick 'em, boys. And they went down there and just leveled them, and the world knew not to mess with the United States. He was the one that stood up in a speech in Germany. Okay, and I'll have to get to this a little bit later, but Germany had been split down the middle by the communists and our side after World War II. And the communists had built a wall to keep their people in because they were all trying to escape to our side because it was so bad on their side. Okay? He stood up, Ronald Reagan stood up right with that wall behind him. And the leader of the Soviet Union, the bad guys, okay, his name was Mikhail Gorbachev. Ronald Reagan stood right there, cameras on him, everything, on a tour to Germany, standing this far away from the Soviet Union, literally, standing there and said, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. And the world went crazy. And guess what? By the year 1990, they tore the wall down. Literally. The Soviet Union collapsed. East Germany collapsed. All of the communist governments, except for 3, just totally died. Okay, and part of that was to do with Ronald Reagan. Okay, so he had this ability to move people, make them do what he thought needed to be done. He had the ability to make them think that's what needed to be done. Sometimes it might not have been quite the right thing, but he was so good he could make people do it. The Germans were in that same situation. They were humiliated. They were beaten down. They were starving to death. They were dying of disease. It was absolutely, and they still had to pay money. They had to pay money to England and France, okay? Well, we're going to get to that. But, yeah, in his ability to move people, yes. Because that's what the Germans did. The Germans looked for help to get out of that, and this is who they found. they found Adolf Hitler, who was standing up in beer halls, of all places, because that's the only place they had to meet. He'd stand up and say, "We need to get the glory of Germany back. Nobody should tell us that we can't do this and we can't do that. Nobody should take our money." And the people just went crazy. They voted his cronies in. Now, he wasn't all, smooth and silky. Okay, he had a group of people working for him that went around, and if people didn't go for his style, they beat him up or they killed him. Okay, but he was literally, legally voted into office. Okay, now in their government at the time, after World War I, it was a democratic government, but it was different than ours. They elected the Congress, and then the Congress elected their chancellor, or what we would call the president. Okay, now in our country, we elect the Congress and we elect the president. Okay, but they didn't do that then. So once the Congress was full of Nazis, because Nazi was a political party just like Democrat and Republican, okay, once they filled the Congress with Nazis, the Nazis elected Hitler as chancellor. So he became the leader. Now, this is why this turns out to be kind of scary. Okay, when you give somebody a lot of power and they're a nutcase, and Hitler was a nutcase, there's no question about that. Okay, he was able to manipulate the people and the government. He could make them do and think things that were completely wrong, and 3 years before the people would have just gone, "Ooh, yeah, no way," but he got them to where they were going, and just eating it up because he was so good at speaking. He could make people just do anything he wanted. Yes?
When did Ronald Reagan...
Forget Ronald Reagan. I didn't want you to put that on your notes. That was an example. Okay? Anyway, so Adolf Hitler gets into power. Now, here's where he really made a manipulation. At the end of World War I, okay, when the Russians were being slaughtered, they left the war, and their government turned into a communist government. The German government during World War I, the Kaiser, they found a man in Switzerland, which is a neutral country, means they don't take sides. They found a man named Vladimir Lenin. He had been kicked out of Russia. The Tsar in Russia didn't like him at all because he was causing problems. He was getting people going this really creepy direction in the government, and the Tsar thought he was going to be overthrown or killed. So he captured this guy, and he told him, "Get out of Russia or we will kill you." And so he left and went to Switzerland and stayed there for years. The Germans found him, and right in the middle of the war, while they're fighting and slaughtering the Russians, they put him on a train and said, "Want to go back to Russia?" And he said, "Da." And they sent him back to Russia, and he did exactly what they wanted him to do. He went in there and started talking, found his old friends, and totally destabilized the government. Ended up getting elected into leadership position and withdrew from the war. That's exactly what Hitler, or what the Kaiser wanted them to do. Okay, he wanted Russia out of the war because they thought they could win then. Okay, so now the government becomes communist. Vladimir Lenin was the first communist leader in the history of the world. Unfortunately, he was not the last. There were many, all the way up to Mikhail Gorbachev, the one that helped tear down the wall. Okay, was a really amazing thing that happened. The Soviet Union they renamed the country the Soviet Union, and they became one of the most evil countries you've ever seen. Okay, the men who took over after Lenin died, one of them's name was Joseph Stalin. He was the leader of the Soviet Union when Hitler took over. Hitler and Stalin hated each other. One was a communist, one was a fascist. I'm not going to try to explain to you what the difference is. Different forms of terrible is what they were. Okay? The Germans were so afraid of the communists over in Germany. You could spit on them. They were just over there in Russia. They were so afraid of them. Hitler had his guys burn down their Capitol building. Okay? Nobody knew that's what happened. Okay? All they knew is they woke up one night and the Reichstag building was in flames. That's the place where the Congress met. Okay? Burned it to the ground, and Hitler came out the next morning going, "It was the communists!" And the people believed him. And they said, "Protect us, Adolf. Keep the communists out." And so he did. He took complete control of the government and never gave it back. Okay, and made a dictatorship, and the rest is history, as they say. Okay? He ends up starting to rearm Germany. He starts bringing in the weapons that they could have. He started multiplying those. He started building their army secretly at first, and then after they got big enough, he started doing it out in the open and kind of going like this to the British and the French, kind of going, dare ya, go ahead and try it, you know, come on in. And the British and the French, by then their leadership had changed, you know, it'd been 21 years or 20 years. Their leadership had changed. The new leaders, they just wanted to make Hitler happy, so they didn't have to have another war. It's okay, we'll let you go that far, but don't go any further. And then he'd go further, and they'd go, oh, you shouldn't have done, don't go any further. Look, you're making us mad. You've done this with your parents, haven't you? You go like this, your dad says, sit down, and you stand there. Sit down. I said, sit down. Okay, now listen to me. Are you sitting? Not quite. Okay? Or they say, stay right there, and you go, I said, stay there. You're making me mad, right? If you took the first step and your dad went, bang, would you ever take another step when they said? No. But because we're afraid to do that, the French and the British were afraid to smack Hitler. They had an idea in the back of their head. You know, they had that little voice back there going, bad guy. You gotta do something here. But we didn't know what to do short of starting another war. And we'd just gotten done with the other. We didn't want to do that again. Even the Americans were going, we gotta, I don't know what you're going to do, but it's a good thing it's in Europe. You guys take care of it. Because that's how we looked at it, going, not our problem. We saved you the last time, not going to do it again. And we stayed out of it. Well, Hitler ended up getting more and more and more power, but in the process, he started looking for weapons and technology that were not written in that treaty. So in other words, he was going around the treaty, trying to find some new stuff. Well, guess what wasn't in the treaty? It's what we're talking about. Rockets. Rockets were not in the treaty because we didn't use rockets in World War I hardly at all. So he sends his secret police out all over Germany looking for cool technologies, and some of them stumble upon a group. I'm going to go past a couple of things here. Oh, no, right here. They found a group of people. Write this guy's name down while I tell you this. Okay? His name is Wernher von Braun. He was only part of, he was just a kid actually, he was only about 21 years old. And he was part of a club in Berlin, Germany, where they launched rockets for fun. You know, I mean, same kind of thing as you guys going playing basketball in a league. They got together and tried out all their cool different ideas for rockets. This is in the early 1930s, so write that date down. Early 1930s. So this is after Robert Goddard had had his success with the liquid fuel engine. See where we are now? So it's after Robert Goddard. So his research is now floating around the world. And these guys in this club are all very well educated. They're brilliant men and boys. And they're having a good old time using Robert Goddard's and Hermann Obert's and Konstantin Tsiolkovsky's research. And they started building these model rockets, some of which were like this tall. And they were liquid fueled, and they were launching them. And the Gestapo, or the secret police, went and looked at that, and they said, that's cool. We can kill people with that. So they went to Wernher von Braun, and they said, now mind you, he's 21 years old. Okay? And this is basically what they said to him. I'm going to use your language. Austin, what do you like to do? If you could do anything just fun all the time, what would you do? Ride motorcycles. Okay, imagine a government person coming to Austin and saying, Austin, how would you like to help us bring the glory back to the United States that we've lost over the few years because of our wars? We will let you ride and build and design motorcycles for America, and we will pay you to do it. What would you say? Yeah. You don't just say, yeah. You go, sign me up. Okay? So Wernher von Braun signs up to do that with rockets for Germany. Yes? Early 1930s. Where was this? You're kidding me, right? Thank you, Austin. Germany. Okay? So he goes to work for Adolf Hitler building rockets. Now, what kind of rockets did Hitler want him to build? weapons, right? Things to kill people with, make big holes in things, okay? No nukes. Nuclear atomic technology did not come until later. But guess what Adolf Hitler got out of somebody else? He had a guy named Werner Heisenberg working on atomic technology, okay? Anyway, Wernher von Braun and all of his buddies get together and they start building these rockets. Okay, now this one looks like a fire arrow, right? This one doesn't. This is Hermann Oberth, one of the three fathers of modern spaceflight. He was a German guy, and he also worked for Hitler. Okay, but this guy is Wernher von Braun. They put him in charge, and I think one of the reasons they probably put him in charge is because he was a very innocent-minded guy. He probably didn't really think too far ahead and see the kind of damage he was going to do. Okay, I think Hermann Oberth, who was a little bit older, probably could smell some of that bad in there. Okay, Wernher von Braun, like I said, was only 21 years old, so he was pretty gullible, if you want to put it that way. And he was just a nice guy. Okay, this is him again carrying that bigger rocket. They started building these amazing rockets, and they were very successful. They ended up building this. This was the V-2 rocket. By the time World War II really got going in 1939, got that? 39, World War II. Okay, when it really got going, about 1942, this rocket started to fly, 42 or 43. They actually became so successful, they could launch this rocket, which I think was about 25 feet tall. They could launch it from Germany and make a hole like this in downtown London. It flew so fast, no airplanes or anything could catch it. Nobody else in the world had rockets that could do that. Werner Heisenberg is working for Hitler because his family was captured, held hostage, and they said, Werner, if you don't build us an atomic bomb, we will kill your family. That's how desperate they were. Imagine what would have happened if Werner Heisenberg had got the atomic bomb before we did and they put it in the tip of one of those. What language would we be speaking? German. Because before long, Wernher von Braun would have had a rocket that could have flown to the United States and there wouldn't have been anything we could have done about it. Okay? We tried. We tried bombing their facility. It didn't work. We tried everything. Okay? Luckily for us, Hitler and his people were just stone cold nuts. And they ended up destroying themselves. They ruined themselves by doing what they did to the Jews and everything else. They destroyed themselves. Because this rocket, you can see that baby's a big deal. And that one's going to blow up, I think, here. You can see the fire coming out where it's not supposed to in there. Ambulance. Okay. No, he drove past, but they turned their sirens off. Anyway, so the Germans did end up losing the war, luckily for us. Okay. Wernher von Braun knew before the war was over that they were going to lose. So he and all of his scientists took all of their stuff, all their research, all their parts, everything, put them on trains, and escaped to the western side of Germany and surrendered to us. They didn't surrender to the British. They didn't surrender to the French. They surrendered to us, luckily for us. What did we do? We shot them all. No. We packed them all up on airplanes and on ships and sent them to the United States. The next week, they were working for us. And it's a good thing, because if it weren't for Wernher von Braun, we would have never made it to the moon. Yeah. Wernher von Braun designed that humongous, massive rocket that took us to the moon. That was his rocket. Okay? So, now we go from here. That's all the German scientists in Texas. That's how many of them surrendered to us. Most of them became American citizens. Okay? A lot of people were upset because we took Nazis who were terrible and we made them American citizens. All right, there you go. We'll start there on. We may not launch on Monday, but you better have your rockets here done. They are due Monday.